Hello, everyone, and welcome to Celebrating Cinema. I'm your host, Elliot. I'm joined by.
Hello, I'm Tom.
Hey, it's Hugo.
And today we're going to be exploring the wonderful world of David Cronenberg. With his latest film, Crimes of the Future, set to be released here in the Netherlands on the 2nd of June, he delved deep into the world of Cronenberg, exploring this polarising figure and his portrayal of everything grotesque, sexual, and gory. He is, of course, a Canadian director considered the forefather of the body horror genre, known for his fascination and obsession with the visceral body transformation, infection, technology, and the intertwining of the psychological with the physical. So who are the real perverts in all of this? Us, the audience, Cronenberg's characters, or Cronenberg himself? Hugo is here to offer some answers for us. Perhaps.
I don't have to do the cold open anymore. Elliot already did it.
Yeah, wow.
Nonetheless, I wrote one, so might as well share it with all of you. Here we go. Lately, I've been experiencing some particular pains in my right index finger, which might be a not so subtle hint that I've been using my smartphone a bit too much. Also, an indication that the human body can't keep up with all the technological innovations that we throw at it. It will be quite convenient for me to simply grow a second thumb, or a sixth, more general finger. But hey, there's a reason it's called evolution. Because for all the good things to come, we need to be patient, I guess. Nonetheless, thinking about these kind of things raises a lot of questions about the relationship between our bodies and the technology we invent. It's not for nothing that the iconic media theorist Marshall McLuhan saw every kind of technology, which can be as broad as a kitchen knife, a pair of glasses, or yes, a smartphone, as an extension of man. It literally extends our capabilities to reach beyond the limitations of our own bodies and enter a kind of virtual world enabled by the technology surrounding us that we are now harnessing. As a matter of fact, the idea that media produced by our technology is only surrounding us is maybe a naive fallacy, a product of a human-centered kind of thinking where we think we can still place ourselves outside of the society we have ourselves produced. We are always living inside the media, is what Professor Mark Deuze at the University of Amsterdam always hammered on. Try to think of it when we consume news on COVID or the war in Ukraine or any other event in the world. We simply go one layer deeper in a kind of reality we're already part of. Technology is the conduit, the extension of us, to give us new insight, but it's a plane of reality we're already in. Nobody is able to translate these kind of reflections on the relationship between technology and the human consciousness as David Cronenberg, a Canadian director who emerged in the world of film with low-budget body horror in the 1970s and then became one of the most iconic genre filmmakers, especially with films like Videodrome, The Fly, Existence, and Crash, that combine highly conceptual critical theory with pulpy and bodily pleasures. His films are disturbing, erotic, violent, and gory, but also smart, generous, essayistic, and simply a whole lot of fun. Videodrome is maybe his grand reflection on media and how the imagery we consume is not virtual at all, but really a physical manifestation of our own desires. It's also one of the most horny mainstream films I've ever seen, which is frankly also an important part of all of Cronenberg's films. Existence, for instance, philosophizes on the way new realities are made possible by the interconnectivity of the computer, but also presents all these new levels of reality as just an extra layer of all the things that we already perceive. It is maybe the most natural companion piece that challenges the techno-utopia of the Matrix, because literally there's never a breaking out of the zeros and ones in existence. All of it, every layer of reality, be it physical or virtual, is just the same in the Cronenberg universe. And as this episode airs, Cronenberg's latest film, Crimes of the Future, is playing in cinemas all over the world, including in the Netherlands. For me, it feels like a kind of coda of the philosophy of Cronenberg, a high concept, low fidelity, science fiction film about the shared imperfections between the computers and the human body. If Existence still promises some kind of escape into a new reality made possible by the computer, then Crimes of the Future is here to tell you that we'll never reach it. Because of all of these factors, for instance the way we develop technology and apply it as an extension of ourselves, are easily always a political battlefield. where the utopians are on the losing side. Set in the impoverished city of Athens, once the symbol of European civilization and now the symbol of capitalist decay, Cronenberg has constructed a tantalizing political allegory in which the human body is desperately trying to catch up with technology, resulting in mysterious new organs that grow in people and need to be surgically removed so that the genetic material of the human will stay human. Can we then still speak of evolution, or is there a literal revolution happening inside of our bodies? Cronenberg here throws a lot of stuff at you, as he often does with his films. Some of it is fantastically gory, and some of it is, again, delightfully horny. But all of it is also quite pensive and reflective. Some of the imagery is quite extreme, but the style sometimes also feels kind of detached, and maybe seemingly devoid of emotion. This is apparent in the unlikely acting style of Cronenberg's muse, Viggo Mortensen, who's absolutely great here, but not as compelling or enigmatic or sympathetic as he was in earlier work like A History of Violence or Eastern Promises or A Dangerous Method. His body, in which bizarre new organs grow, is a literal site of art in the film, and his creative and erotic partner, played by Léa Seydoux, is the artist/performer who surgically removes these organs as part of the performance art presented in these concrete-like techno club. So essentially the question is it long live the new Flash, as Videodrome iconically proclaimed, or something maybe more sinister or bleak? And is this film also such an instant classic as Videodrome and Existence, which it heavily relies on, or is this maybe a lesser Cronenberg reflecting at his own career in the rearview mirror? There's a lot of things to process here, so I just suggest that we get into the weeds and try to parse out what we make of Crimes of the Future.
It is time to stop seeing. It is time to listen.
A new world opens up.
You afraid of a little emotion?
Surgery is the new sex.
They are evolving away from the human path.
I think it'll be a revelation.
Might not be quite legal.
So I guess a good first question to begin with is to both of you what you thought of the film in maybe a general sense.
Thank you for this great cold open, Hugo.
You're welcome.
You're covering a lot of ground here. And also, I'll dive right into the thing that you asked about. Is this maybe lesser Cronenberg? Is it him reflecting on his past works? Yeah, I do think that is. I have the feeling that, of course, the thing with Cronenberg is that he has these themes that always return in all his works. The things that you mentioned, the sex related to the technology, the sort of austere acting style that he, well, I'm not sure if he asks that of his actors, but at least everybody does feel like sometimes like a puppet.
Flashy puppet.
A flashy puppet. Yeah, for me, I thought it was a very interesting film. I thought he brought up interesting ideas. There's a very, very idea, as you say, like almost essayistic movie. For me, it doesn't fully come together due to mainly, I think, like the thing that Cronenberg has with how you perceive his characters. If they are too austere and if there's not a character within the sort of ensemble that you're looking at, the viewer can have the experience of just watching a sort of tableau vivant without actually, and that for me at least, not really emotionally getting into it. And if I look back at his works where that was different, even though it is very much, as you say, like a sort of a bodily extension of films like Videodrome and Existence.
There's an intimacy involved in playing Existence that is beyond description.
In the not-too-distant future, Allegra Geller has created the ultimate escape.
The possibilities are so great.
This is amazing.
A parallel universe called Existence.
Now I'm warning you. It's going to be a wild ride.
Those films do have characters within their storyline that seem to be outside of the world building that he does, that bring me into that. So in Existence, for instance, and I really love Existence, and I love the fact that you mentioned The Matrix, for instance, because they came out in the same year. Existence, just like Dark City, also is very much there is a reality behind reality thing, which we're finally doing a program on in Lab
down
111.
The rabbit hole program.
Yeah,
Follow the right rabbit.
Actually, Crimes of the Future does sort of fit in there, and Existence does. We're screening Existence because it does. Existence has Jude Law, who I think he's like a sort of intern who gets involved with the video game designer played by I always forget her name, Jennifer
Jason Leigh.
Jennifer Jason Leigh. There we go. Who is Allegra Geller, who is a video game designer who made this game called Existence. And you have to have a pod to this, of course, this ugly, fleshy
pod. It's a fleshy computer. It's the same as in Crimes of the Future.
Exactly, yeah. These are returning things, but with an umbilical cord, you have to put in this sort of anus-like hole at the low part of your back. But he is not sort of informed, or he needs to be introduced into this world. So he is sort of like your guiding character into this. And it's the same, well, with Videodrome, I think it's James Woods himself finds out about the sexual
deviancy.
The snuff cable TV that he finds of Debbie Harry being slapped by a guy, and then realizes that you get tumors out of watching that.
I don't know where I am now. I'm having trouble finding my way around.
That's because you've gone just about as far as you can with the way things are. Videodrome still exists. It's very big, very complex. You've hurt them, but you haven't destroyed them. To do that, you have to go on to the next phase.
What phase is that?
Your body has already done a lot of changing, but that's only the beginning. The beginning of the new flesh.
And he's like a TV exec who's kind of like finding out that the media that he works with, the technology, can also be harnessed for something much more transgressive than he wants to show, which is like Videodrome played in the 1980s, which also a moment where you see this kind of like general conservative mindset really being institutionalized, but then also everybody being very frantic about how the technology and the power that they are harnessing can also be subverted all the time. At least that's the political allegory that I often read in it as well, is that it's kind of like a ideological battle of what media can give you, and subconsciously we will all of these transgressive things into existence because simply we desire it, even if we pretend that we don't. But your point is really good, because essentially you're saying that many of those other films follow a more conventional formula where if there is a fantastic world, and this might as well be, Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth, like you need a person that is not familiar with the stakes and the rules of that world to introduce you into it, because they become the vessel, the conduit for you to also understand the stakes, the context, the texture, the rules, and the possible outcomes. And you want to see that person transform, because that's often the easiest way to identify in the film, even though it is really out there or sci-fi or fantasy, is to see that transformation, and you are kind of like they are standing for you, right? Because you're also not familiar with it at the beginning.
Well, it's funny that you use the word transformation, because of course, of all his films that he made, I think the most, although it's very much not a mainstream film, the film that he made that also has two characters that suddenly find themselves in this transformatory situation where the world is, well, actually one guy is changing into a fly, is The Fly with Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis.
There is a limit, even to the imagination.
Human teleportation, molecular decimation, breakdown, and reformation is inherently purging.
Where our greatest creations meet our deepest fears.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
You are about to go beyond that limit.
Which isn't necessarily only a film about a guy turning into a fly. It's about many things. It's even about the anxieties of pregnancy. I mean, the wonderful cameo that Cronenberg has as the gynecologist that sort of brings this pod from her and just presents it to her like it's baby. But it is within his body of work, maybe his most conventional film in a way.
Yeah, totally. It's his most like studio friendly film, even though it's already quite out there. But the transformative aspect is essentially part of all of his films, because body horror, of course, which Elliot also greatly stated at the beginning, is very much the concern of many of his films, or it's the easiest label to slap on a Cronenberg film. But essentially what lies underneath every body horror film, and you could also take more recent films like Raw and Titan by Julia Ducournau, the underlying assumption is the anxieties that come with transformation. And what is underneath that is the fear of realizing maybe that an identity, a body, a personality, and simply a human being is not a fixed thing. Even though, and this also brings it back to like a 1980s conservative kind of framework, people really want you to believe that it is fixed, of course, because that is very convenient if everybody adheres to a certain rule. You are a man, I am a man, they are, women or whatever. Like, there's so many like things that you can slap on people as kind of an identity. And in the grotesque world of Cronenberg, he delights in seeing that all crumble and seeing that all like fall literally into decay as well. And then the beauty, because that's essentially, it's not about the nastiness underneath that, it's the beauty is in the destruction of that, right? He has a film like The Brood, which is you could say the evil Kramer versus Kramer. It's kind of it's a film about a couple going through a really, really nasty divorce. But it's also the dissolution of the nuclear family, and what's then underneath it is the horror basically instilled in all of us, that we have to feel like we need to latch on to those conservative structures. So there's also beauty and joy in the destruction of all of those things. And it looks like it's very evil and sick, but maybe it's not. What I really like about Crimes of the Future, to bring it back to that film, is that it makes that very explicit. That in the kind of like bodily mutilation, in the revoking maybe of some of these old practices, that's where potentially real beauty lies. So I was talking about these organs, right? But there's a very funny thing that in this world where people grow new organs that they can't explain, some people in that world also see that as an invitation of new beauty. They call it the inner beauty. And we often think of inner beauty as like your personality, but here it's literally made physical through our organs. Like they can be very
And you get
beautiful.
those organs tattooed as well.
The organs get tattooed, the organs get removed and they get cataloged. The organs become art. They are things to ponder upon. So basically, it's like if we bring everything down to its most elemental nature, really the most bodily things that we experience, which is us in our truest sense, right? Maybe all of the other things are just an interpretation of that. That is where the true inner body or inner beauty lies, at least in the universe of Crimes of the Future. So, Jesus, that's already a lot to unpack.
You went way deep there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it's like, this is, I guess, why this film for me then is very exciting, because first of all, it rejects also the more conventional trajectory of what a film like this would maybe be 40 years ago or whatever. It is him in his like late outdoor mode where he doesn't need that setup anymore because you're already on the level, because he brought you there. You also have like a pretty deep interpretation already immediately of this film, but that is only possible because we have seen his previous films, right? It's only possible due to the fact that we see Videodrome and Existence and Crash and maybe a zillion other films that he made as well. You could easily throw in Maps to the Stars, even though it's his least body horror film, but you could still take a lot of that and apply it to this film. And all of it works because he already has you on a base level and then plays with it. So you don't need to have that first introductory part. You can basically just skip the first act, put you in the second act, and then just play with that for a bit longer, and then he lets you go again.
Yeah, but it's funny because that actually, I might have the exact same interpretation as you, although my conclusion of that train of thought is a negative one, where I do indeed see the auteurist strokes of genius, but for me it ends up being less than the sum of its parts. It does remind me of Dead Ringers. It does remind me of Existence. It does remind me of Videodrome. Only what I'm watching is not the best of greatest hits that I want him to do.
From David Cronenberg, who in The Fly made the fantastic real.
Get him out of here! Radical technology was required.
Something radical is definitely required.
Now, David Cronenberg makes reality the ultimate fantasy. Dead Ringers.
Separation can be a terrifying thing.
It's very funny because it's like you often see films, I guess, just in life where you see that a filmmaker, this is just more in general terms, like a filmmaker is referencing clearly a classic or something, right? Which is a very high wire act, because if you reference that classic all the time, maybe you're riffing all of these great films that preceded the thing that you're making, and your film is just generally worse, then it can kind of get buried under the wave of all of these great films, right? And sometimes that can be a very frustrating watch. Sometimes I guess you also have to be a bit generous and try to see what they are working through. I'm now more on the side that I like that Cronenberg already believes that you are at a specific level, so he can just finally hone in on some of these stray themes that are maybe like loosely connected and then just all tie them together. It might be my version of the like Doctor Strange multiverse of madness, where I'm like seeing like all the super themes of of Cronenberg coming together, fighting it out, you know. It's mostly a film about rhetoric as well, because it's basically just about clashing ideologies and different world views on the world and the body, etc., fighting it out. And I kind of like that clash, that it's also more linguistic almost than that it is plot or anything else. You know, the stakes are, in a strange way, kind of not very high. That's a pleasure that I take out of it. But Elliot, I'm wondering, because you haven't seen that many Cronenbergs yet, what you make of this conversation, but also what you think of both my admiration of this film and Tom's doubts with the way it's presented to you.
I think I fall somewhere between the two of
how
you.
convenient.
But I'll explain
That's
why.
it. This is celebrating cinema.
So the two films I've watched before were Dead Ringers and Crash. A bit different in some respects. But I think even from watching those two, I was informed enough to understand what he was doing in this film. And it felt very much like The Crimes of the Future was sort of everything he's been trying to do in the past. The sense of like the sexualization of the body without having to engage in sex.
Yeah.
And here it's all about the cutting of the flesh, but then also taking it to a deeper meaning of, like you were saying, about the inner beauty and how the body is a canvas. I think that's something he's very obsessed with. But then with Tom, I also agree that it's not very coherent at times, or there's too many subplots going on at the same time where he's trying to do too much. But I think it comes out in a way where you understand what he's doing and you can appreciate it for that, because you're left with all these questions that are unanswered and they should be unanswered.
You know, ultimately, the crimes of the future are the friends we made along the way.
Jesus Christ. I will. I cannot transition from here, but I will try. The thing that I said this to you guys before we started recording the podcast, is that my issue while walking out of the cinema yesterday, seeing it, is that I know from past experiences that I can see a Cronenberg film and then years later find my opinion of it. And this happened with Crash.
In a society driven to extremes, two people met by accident.
Were you badly hurt? I think we saw each other at the hospital.
You haven't told me where we're going.
I haven't?
James Ballard has been seduced into a secret world.
The car crash is a liberation of sexual energy.
Where the only way to connect is to crash.
I remember that I saw Crash when I well, I think I was way too young. I can't remember. I was like maybe be 18 or something, and it made no sense. And it's such a cerebral film about the literal crash between sex and cars to really wind it down to just that. And all the characters in that movie, and this is where I will start to my opinion won't make any sense anymore. All those characters in that film are completely austere. They're like sort of walking bricks. But the film is mainly about arousal and finding perverted pleasure in somebody having a pin through their arm because of a car crash they had. And I remember firmly hating it when it finished. But it is the Cronenberg that I thought about the most often through the years.
Sorry, why did you hate it when you first watched it?
Didn't pull me in. I was at a complete distance of these characters. I felt that they were just, fleshy puppets floating through air. And it felt extremely pretentious to me. And if there's one thing that I don't enjoy, and that's one of the sort of issues I had with Crimes of the Future as well, is pretension for pretension's sake. Although Crimes of the Future does have those moments, there are also moments where that disappears and where it's funny and where those opposites for me just felt too jarring. And that's also why I just couldn't get into the flow of this movie, that it's tonally, the shifts are too big for me. But again, I'll reiterate this, years later, I saw Crash here in our cinema again, and it was a completely different experience. So with that in my knapsack, I've seen this film now, and I just don't want to fully, and as you know, I can have my opinion ready, but I just can't allow myself to fully form that opinion.
Yeah, it's hard because like we literally saw this film yesterday, and there's like, I feel like even with what you've been saying, Elliot, and you as well, Tom, and what I've added with the cold open, we're still somehow only scratching the surface.
Yeah.
And this is ultimately maybe why the film is, for me, very good, is also because there's some moments where all the linguistic stuff and kind of like the ruminations on like the body and its politics and etc. and the artistic merit of it seems a bit nonsensical or kind of pretentious. I think that is also very consciously on like Cronenberg that he put that into the film, because I think he's presenting here also kind of like a society where people are trying to find, it's just a really shitty world as well, right? Everything is just really run down, very fucking bleak. You know, as I said, it's like going down in Athens, which is, of course, kind of this symbol of like the Euro crisis. It's like one of the most austere, impoverished capital cities in Europe at the moment as well. So
it starts with that Costa Concordia shot of the boat lying on its side.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the Titanic is sinking in slow motion already, like, or it has already sunk a million times, because you have this whole shipwreck where there's like dozens of those boats just lying on their side, being like rusty and sad and stuff. So it seems like the characters in this world that are very pretentious about these films are just also simply maybe kind of pretentious in the sense that they are also escapist, you know, they're trying to escape this bleak reality through art, and the only art that really seems to matter in a way that actually seems to have value is art that is authentically created. You know, they try to go back to an aura as well. It reminds me of like the end of, or like this part of the Children of Men, where this guy has like this art collector, and it's like an absolutely dystopian world, and this art collector has like some of the most, he's got like Guernica,
he's got the Picasso,
by Picasso in his fucking house. You know, one of the most important art pieces of the 20th century, just devalued almost like that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's a dinner table picture there.
It's a dinner table picture, you know. It's like a talking piece for him to gloat with, but there's nobody to brag to anymore. The art has become inconsequential almost, and I think they are now latching onto a thing where it still seems to have value, but also ascribe so much to it because it's literally the only thing that they can engage with. Politics for the longest time seems to be out of the question. And then suddenly through Viggo Mortensen, who is the guy who creates these organs, he wills them, they think, into existence and then has them removed. Actually, what might be under it is again a political layer. And there's one subplot which is very convoluted. I don't have to get into it, but they politicize it again. They make him part of a cause. And every Cronenberg film, if you think about it, or almost every Cronenberg film, could be about, in a sense, political awakening. If you take James Woods, of course, in Videodrome, he thinks that he's part of a status quo where he is a TV exec and they're broadcasting their things. Literally, they are part of like a power structure, legacy media. And then he finds out about TV, radio, or like TV piracy, and he scrambles the channels with the hacker dude and whatever, there's some techno speak. And then suddenly he finds himself in the world of porn and perversion and torture. But it's so potent, and he never realized how strong it is. And he becomes radicalized by it as well. It completely alters literally the way that he perceives the world. You're talking about Jude Law, this eager PR boy who's working for the video game developer, and he gets like sucked into this awesome world that's much bigger than he actually is. This same force is also in this film. I'm not sure how convincing it is because it is a bit more subdued, but I think that's also what I like about it because it seems to reflect very much also an end of all of these legacy medias in a sense. Everything is a disappointment. The computers suck, the body sucks, the politics in between it that regulate it suck. Everything in the film, the whole world is just kind of really shitty. So I can kind of forgive all the people for being very weirdly naive or weirdly pretentious or placing too much emphasis on things because maybe the only things they can latch on, right? So this, I don't know, it's a very broad reading of those things, but it's been on my mind a lot that this film seems to deal a lot with some of the disappointments of like seeing how basically crappy all the things are that really have been such a invasive part of our lives, maybe.
Yeah, I think there is very much a reluctance to accept the world that they have. So they're evolving, but I don't know if we could say they're evolving there, because to me they're adjusting to the new climate in the sense that their bodies are starting to learn how to digest plastic.
Yeah.
Because that's what's dominating that world. And I think
it's a film mostly as well indeed about pollution, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I really like about it, because I think perhaps it's also a pessimistic outlook, but maybe also one that we can see where we're reluctant to see the destruction that we've caused to the world. And instead we are obsessing over the beauty that we think is there. Because I was also very confused whether to see Viggo Mortensen as the artist and all this stuff, which is explored, because he's resisting revolution. I don't know if that's art, or I don't know. It asks a lot of questions, and that's why I was very confused of.
There's like a big thing in the film of like, as I already said, like Lea Seydoux, his creative partner, and she's the person performing these surgeries in front of a crowd. And then a big thing is made in the film about the question, who is the artist, right? So it's also about like subject, object, and kind of like who's the perceiver and who perceives and who's the artist and who gets performed on, basically.
Yeah.
But also maybe even the question if we are authors of our own body.
Yeah.
Can Mortensen be seen as the author of those sort of new organs? Or is he also just a vessel of his own body, if
like
it makes
Lea
any
Seydoux
sense?
says that they are creating art out of the anarchy of the body, instilling meaning into a thing that...
Yeah, so they're sub to their body, really. They're not really owning their body.
Because Elliot, you seem on the verge of an epiphany here.
No. I was just going to say, for me, there's some kind of irony that is the distraction of the story, because what actually is going on is something greater than that, which is the revolution of the body. And so that's why I think it comes back to, in the sense that art, maybe Cronenberg is getting at, can be a distraction from what is going on around us. We're sort of blinding ourselves from it. But I don't know if that's too
Totally, no, I think
pessimistic.
that's a really great point. And I think that, I think we both perceiving the same pessimism, because I think like the film really deals a lot with disappointment in the sense. many people want things from other people and are also not getting it, right?
Yeah, and that's where I think you can excuse the disappointment of not having a conduit to follow throughout the story, or the way that it ends. It ends for me very abrupt, but I think in a way that I'd want it to end.
Exactly, because that's the whole point of most Cronenberg films. Once a person has a changed perception of reality through like a myriad of ways, either technological, but mostly erotically as well, there's many factors that can make you stray from the path you thought you were on and suddenly be on a radically new path. Then for Cronenberg, in most cases, the mission is complete.
Yeah, it's not interesting anymore at all.
No, it's like
that's not what he's talking about.
It's like in Cosmopolis, you have Robert Pattinson also closing in the twilight, dialectic between Kristen Stewart, who is in this film, and Robert Pattinson, who is the lead in Cosmopolis. But
let's not talk about her performance, because then we have a long conversation about us not agreeing.
I love Kristen Stewart in this film so much, and
she's too much.
To be honest, that's one of the most arousing things. We can talk about it later, if this film is even horny, in fact. But in Cosmopolis, you have Robert Pattinson, Elliot, and he's in the back of a limousine. He's like a millionaire or billionaire or even more. I don't know. He's
based on the Don DeLillo book,
it's based on the Don DeLillo novel. And it feels like it's very much channeling 2008 stock market kind of crash, kind of like Occupy Wall Street, kind of that kind of stuff. So he's in a limousine while stocks are crashing and there's rebellion or protest on the street. And he's like cocooned. The limousine is kind of his computer in the sense of like maps to the future. It's kind of like his crib and his coffin at the same time.
Maps to the future.
Nice. And Crimes of the Future, yeah. Maps to the Future, yeah. Well, everybody knows what I'm talking about, Crimes of the Future. So he's kind of like stuck in this like liminal space almost of the limousine. And during the course of the film, his worldview also shatters. And it, of course, ends with him leaving the limousine and kind of becoming a human, because he's not a human in the limousine. He's like everything, he's the god of his own. Like he's as... the Bonfire of the Vanities book proclaims, he's kind of like his own master of the universe. It's kind of like too powerful to be a human anymore.
Where's your car?
We can't seem to find it.
I'd offer you a ride.
I couldn't. Absolutely. I know you work en route. And I like taxis. I was never good at geography, and I learned things by asking the drivers where they come from.
They come from horror and despair.
Yes, exactly.
But he transforms as well in a very radical, economically charged way. This film, for me, feels very much like a companion piece to that as well. And once that radical transformation has happened, then there's no need to see any further than that. Then that's simply the end for Cronenberg, which I really like because, again, it's not a conventional story structure. And to be honest, I've seen conventional stories maybe often enough in my life that I really appreciate it if a filmmaker can just go to the parts that they find interesting and make me part of those moments. So yeah, I think I'm a staunch defender of Crimes of the Future.
Tom still seems unconvinced.
Yeah, absolutely. I am unconvinced. There are many things about this film that I don't like, and then there are many ideas. For instance, one of my problems that I mentioned just when we came out of the screening is that I just want to have, this is a call to all filmmakers to realize that a creaking door doesn't have the same pitch all the time. And I know Hugo hates me for saying this because, this is just something that I always hear that nobody else does, and just annoys the crap out of me. But still, there are many things in this movie, as I said earlier, is that there are ideas that I like, but it does indeed not cohere for me in such a way that I can apparently appreciate it like you guys do.
I want to add one thing to that because it is very obvious that Cronenberg is now also working with a lower budget.
Oh, yeah,
which has
absolutely.
to be said then, of course. I mean, it's for a reason that the film takes place in Athens. It's a Greek co-production as well.
There are just a couple of locations.
Yeah, a couple of Greek actors as well, some Greek, crew and stuff.
You can also see it in some of the CGI, which reminded me a lot of the CGI that Lynch did in Twin Peaks Return.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where it's this where it's shoddily done, but for some reason, due to the fact that the idea or the design of it is so jarring that it almost kind of works, that the CGI itself isn't good.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
Lynch makes it work a bit better than
Yeah,
Cronenberg in some cases. It only makes me think of that it is so special that there was a moment where Cronenberg in fact got to work with quite hefty budgets and managed to combine like the desires or the needs of a studio film with his subversive, transgressive imagery. That's like a big anomaly actually almost in film history, that he managed to be so powerful within this genre as well, which could easily be marginalized as like just low budget midnight movie. And you really see that, that's a far cry from the stuff that you see here. Nonetheless, some of the imagery I think is very evocative, and some of the practical effects are absolutely fantastic. So,
But do we know if he is in the same situation that Lynch is now in, where you will not get the big budgets that he had for, like Lynch had for Blue Velvet and for Lost Highway and Wild at Heart? And
well, it's safe to say that Cosmopolis and Maps to the Stars, his previous two films, were not, very successful. And the only thing in between Maps to the Stars and this film that he made, and Maps to the Stars is 2014.
It's 8 years ago.
Short film that he kind of made to be co-presented with a exhibition of his work in Toronto, which also was presented in in the Film Museum here in Amsterdam. So it's been a long, long time since he made a feature film, and it, often there can be a myriad of issues there, or like also personal things at stake, but generally most of the time it's just a matter of budget. So I think he has those issues as well.
Yeah, I still find things like that rather jarring, because even on the international market, of course, Lynch had the situation where even Mulholland Drive was a French co-production, like that was maybe the last big film that Lynch made.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre that they are generally maybe not for a mainstream audience, but for the audience that I mostly cater to in this cinema, they are like, the top of the bill. It's so bizarre that things have changed in such a way that people like that cannot get more budget than they can get to, get those doors squeaking in a different pitch,
Well, yeah, unintentionally then it fits the film that it also deals with poverty and decay in a sense. Like maybe again what I said about disappointment, right? It's
maybe it was deliberate, Tom.
Oh yeah,
I'm not saying that, but unintentionally.
Yeah, because I feel disappointed. The movie worked. yeah. We're not going there.
Hello, my dear friends. Kiriko here. There is a very clear reason for why I'm not joining you at the table tonight, which is because, so I consider myself a pretty open-minded person, right? Like, when it comes to cinema, I would say I would watch everything that one would recommend to me or even not recommend to me. But maybe Cronenberg is the one single director whom I will not give a second chance. And I think I've mentioned this in the podcast before, in a very early on episode. And the reason for it is this. So I watched a lot of movies that children should not see at a very young age. One of them being Existence. I saw that when I was probably 4 or 5. And the scenes and the images from that film for the longest period of time have been lingering on in my mind at moments that are just not, you see these things and then you're having breakfast, you're walking down the street, you're having a conversation with God knows who, and then Existence pops up, It's just the kind of, the life you don't wish for. And that went on for many, many years. Fortunately, that has stopped. But I would say throughout my teenage life that Existence has been very close to me. It's the little devil on my shoulder that sometimes just goes like, "Whoa!" And then Existence left my life after a couple of years. But then, a couple of years ago, I think it's 3 years ago, there was a retrospective in a couple of cinemas here in Amsterdam. And I decided it's just not going to be for me. So I'm not going to even watch another one of his films. And then I was dating this guy, right, who was also kind of into movies, but not as much as I was. And then he proposed that we would go to the cinema together. And then for fun, he wanted to choose the film that we were going to go to, which happened to be Crash, which I knew was a Cronenberg film, but I was like, I kind of like this guy, and why not? I mean, maybe I was too young, and maybe this thing that they say is that you have to revisit the places where your trauma has been caused to sort of recover from your trauma. So I was like, maybe Crash is going to be that moment for me. So we went to see Crash. It was very intense, especially for a third date. Luckily, I'm still dating the guy who I went to Crash with, so it didn't have like a huge imprint on our relationship or our sex life. Imagine if it would. It actually was a really uncomfortable moment to go see Crash on a third date with the guy that you like. Like, you guys remember that moment where he penetrates the leg? Like, so that was my second experience with Cronenberg. It was not a good one for me. And that's when I definitely, foreverly decided that Cronenberg will not actively be a part of my life. But I will listen to the podcast episode, of course. I'm very curious on what you guys have to say. You're not going to convince me in any way or another. But yeah, enjoy the rest of the conversation. Miss you guys, and see you very soon. Bye.
Thank you, Kiriko. Well, this reminds me of what I think is my first Cronenberg that I watched, and that was The Fly. And maybe I've told this story before on the podcast, is that when my parents divorced, I had to take these, you don't know how you call that, but you go to the weekends with your dad, and then 2 weeks now, and then,
you become a Spielberg baby.
I become the Spielberg child. And my dad didn't really know what to do with me. So he took me to the video rental store, but I could always pick up anything that I wanted. And that's how I saw The Fly. And I believe that The Fly is from 88? 86. So yeah, that's the year that I was born. So I probably saw it much later on then. But yeah, there's a part in The Fly where he becomes incredibly strong.
Yeah.
And he goes to a bar and he arm wrestles a guy and breaks his arm. And just that image of, like the lower bone on your arm, like sticking out, but the other one still being in his arm. It's this super, I can see now you even wincing, like, because we have to mention this, when we watched Crimes of the Future, I could feel Elliot sitting next to me and just wincing at the moments where there was a woman with a sort of, it wasn't a knife, but it also wasn't it felt like this thing that you get
like
carpets. Like a pizza cutter.
Yeah.
Like just in this very sort of elitist, lavish party, sort of thrusting that thing into a foot of a woman and them both being incredibly aroused.
Kind of like the bone crunch.
Yeah, the bone crunching. And I could feel it go like, oh,
I wanted to ask you both actually if you can handle your body horror well, or if this film was sometimes also too much, because in the context of Cannes, often people are like writing about who's
panic
going to walk,
attacks,
walking out. It also happened with the Julia Ducournau film, but it often happens. And Cronenberg, before the festival began, also said like, I'm predicting many people will walk out and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like that becomes this whole own narrative of kind of like the visceral experience of watching the film. How strongly do you have those physical feelings while watching it?
Massively. I think that's why I've shied away from Cronenberg in the past. But I think having watched Raw and Titan, I'm slowly becoming sensitized or desensitized to it in a way. Or, I don't know, it moves me in the same way, but I can sort of get past that now to understand what they're doing. Whereas before I'd be too squeamish to sort of be open to what was happening.
Mm.
The funny thing is that this, for me, with Crimes of the Future, again, has to do with I had to laugh at a lot of those moments in this film, or I was amused more than I felt, and then I really felt that visceral thing that I had, for instance, with Titan, the moment where she breaks her own nose on the side of the... there goes Elliot again. On the side of the... what is it? Like the wash... like
the sink.
The sink. By the way, Julia Corneau, you're not listening to this podcast, but I would just want to thank you for the fact that I am sure you made the deliberate choice of picking out a square sink instead of a round one, because even the fact that it just had this protruding thing that it's a small, sharp point that you need to break her nose on it's such a genius choice to go like, no, I think we need a square sink for this. Yeah, and that does really get under my skin. And there are also moments in Dead Ringers which I really love and which we'll be screening as a companion piece to Crimes of the Future, actually, which are, just so ish, if that makes sense. It doesn't make me wince as you're doing here now, even talking about it. But I do like that. One of my favorite words in the English review dictionary, like the sort of put that on the poster word, is visceral.
Mm-hmm.
If it is, I like movies like that.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so.
And did you guys also kind of like, did it arouse you? Because part of the pleasure of the Cronenberg films is that they, deal with the erotic as well. This one does so quite explicitly a lot of times, but is it actually arousing for you, or is it more a distanced like reflection or contemplation on the erotic?
For me, the latter. And I think, again, that has to do with the fact that I was lacking that sort of emotional connection that I apparently need, that comes from my parents being separated. No. But, and it's weird. It's still strange for me to talk about that sort of comparison to Crash, because that when I did rewatch it, that is very arousing. And also, especially the sort of scene with Elias Koteas and Deborah Kara Unger. I actually really missed that actress. She was also really great in The Game. An extremely underrated David Fincher movie, if you ask me. But
probably his best film.
Well, there you go. In the back of the car while they're driving through the car wash.
Yeah.
That moment feels like it shouldn't be happening, but it also should be happening. That it feels wrong, but it also feels very arousing, and you don't really know what to make of it. The characters and the scene and Cronenberg are sort of playing with what you should and shouldn't be experiencing. Is it perverse? Is it? Yeah. No, I mean, as I said, well, not with this film, but maybe like in 10 years, then I have to reevaluate it. So how about you?
Yeah, I thought this film was very arousing in a strange way, but I think it's for the same reason that you thought it was not. Because, with many of his other films, he would give you a clearer or easier kind of like grip on the story through, like you said, a person that also is introduced in the universe, right? And he gives you maybe a more visceral identification into the film itself. But what I kind of liked about this was the surface glance, because then I feel more explicitly like I am kind of like deeping into their reality.
Yeah.
It felt in a sense more, also in that case, maybe pornographic than many of his previous films, even though they are also often dealing with the erotic and the sexual and the pornographic. But because I also felt often at times at distance, it was kind of like being able to see them from a distance as well. And that actually really worked for me, because they just seemed to be totally in their own kind of like...
It made you more into a perverted peeping Tom.
Yeah, literally it makes me the pervert in the cinema. And I kind of like that, because I think that there is something really perverted about film as well in that regards. Like, so much of it is driven by our desire, and so few directors know how to play into that or acknowledge that. They just are on that same drive as well, subconsciously maybe. But or maybe they are on a very cynical way, but he is on a very, for me, intelligent, aware way, that he is playing with that desire of like, there is a sense of perversion in cinema at large, and he knows how to work that. That's why he's often so good with these kind of scenes, I would say. And here, I think like, it really worked for me. It really clicks when then they are on the other plane of like consciousness or reality, or kind of like engagement with each other and the body that I can't access, but I can see that they are enjoying it. So I'm already kind of like with them, or like I'm not with them, but I enjoy seeing them being in their own thing that I can't reach. So it kind of arouses me. I know. So it's maybe very personal thing now. Jesus.
It just it almost feels like I'm sorry, I'm not just gonna say this. Like within porn, you don't need the milkman, but I do.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can just be dropped in there, and I need a guy going like, I think you need your TV repaired.
Yeah, you need like it's the narrative impetus of porn.
Yeah.
And it's often like, that's always a big tension also, especially in porn films as film. There's a one like oddball comparison that I really feel with this film. There's this porn director, Steven Ciadian, who I'm a big fan of his work. As a matter of fact, I interviewed him a couple of years ago when all of his films were presented at the Genre Film Festival in Brussels, because he makes films that are kind of like dealing with the macabre and the absurd and the dystopic. He made like a remake of Dr. Caligari. He made a film about atomic war. All of these, like his first film called Night Dreams, is kind of like this grotesque nightmare situation, which could be really compared to Eraserhead. But all of it is hardcore porn as well, right? And there's one film of his from 1983 called Café Flash. I actually once, this is maybe like my lasting achievement, I once presented this film and also pitched it to the Film Museum in Amsterdam to screen it in their erotic film program. And they eventually caved and screened it. And then I got to do the introduction. But it's a film about like a post-nuclear world where 99% of the population has become sex negative, so they can't have sex anymore. And the 1% that is sex positive performs the sex in kind of like atomic bunkers, which are kind of like cafes/rock stages. And they perform on stage as kind of like these huge choreographed sex acts in front of an audience that can only look. And the film is very conscious about that our desire to look is just as powerful as our desire to actually have the sex itself. But it also is like a reflection on you having to look because they are the ones doing it, and you have to identify with the audience who is the sex negative. So it also kind of cocks you in a way, like it brings you in a position of relative lower power than the people performing in the film, because you are also implicated as one of the sex negatives, because why else are you in the movie theater watching a porn film, right?
This feels very Ice White Shutty, I must say.
Actually, true, yeah,
but
maybe.
Ice White Slutty, maybe.
But the good thing, what I really like here is that all of the things that they are doing is all the time also very performative, and maybe that's it, that you're kind of in on that as well. The surgeries that they perform, like the Kristen Stewart character, she after a while has the greatest line that she's like whispering into Viggo Mortensen's ear, like, sex, isn't it? Surgery is the new sex. And
it's
then
so Cronenberg.
Viggo Mortensen is like, I didn't know we needed a new one. But actually he did know, because he's not good at the old sex,
Yes,
right?
skip to that might be my best line, is where this is, okay, small, maybe, I don't know if you can even do a spoiler for a
it's so
Cronenberg
good,
one.
yeah.
Where Kristen Stewart and
she really hits
Viggo
on
Stu-
him.
Yeah, they kiss. Which already, as a viewer, that's weird, because people don't.
That's like the most grotesque thing almost in the
How
film
are these
is a
people
kiss.
kissing
That's
normally?
fantastic,
Because
right?
that's not what they do in that future.
That's not hot.
And then he just says, "I'm not very good at the old sex."
But that scene is so good, because I love Kristen Stewart in that scene, because she has like this kind of like squeamish attitude to a lot of things. But she is maybe then, even though she's not the protagonist, she is the stand-in for us, maybe, because she is like very squeamish and finds all of the things at the one side like very kind of like too much and overdone, but at the other hand totally interesting and tantalizing, and is really very much curious to find out more, right? And she is actually the person that's kind of moving with us into the world of Cronenberg, where you have to let go of the old thing and learn to accept the new thing that is what's Cronenberg throwing at you. And she's really
the new
like,
organ flesh.
Yeah, and she's really, really aroused by it, but also still kind of scared all the time. And she doesn't know how to communicate it. And she is the stunted person that we are in the cinema. And then she comes to Viggo Mortensen, with so much desire to break through that as well, to reach his level. Because for him, all of it, he's so experienced in that world. He's done everything. You can feel that. And like, oh, that moment is so good. It's probably my favorite moment in the
Hugo is
film.
getting way too aroused about
Yeah,
this.
No,
movie.
I'm not. I'm not getting aroused now. But let's say that I'm just, grateful that he still has that in him. And there's a couple of moments in Videodrome that are also for me fantastic, because I guess that he really makes the perverse in that film also seem very compelling, which is ultimately what all pornography and eroticism often, plays with. Like, how much further can we push the boundary and still make you aroused, right?
Yeah.
And I think that Cronenberg is quite good at doing that as well in his own way, but then also always making it kind of like allegory or a kind of metaphor for the stakes in the world itself.
Yeah.
So it ties back into his political kind of mapping of his stories as well.
Listening to all this and how aroused you are by watching Cronenberg. No, but I think perhaps my resistance or reluctance to delve into it is because I am perhaps hesitant to let my
You're
body...
British.
But sort of lose control of myself when watching a film. I think watching Cronenberg, like we said, is very visceral.
Mhm.
And in that sense, you lose a certain element of control of yourself
Mhm.
when watching it. And I think that's perhaps what makes me uncomfortable, I guess, at times.
Yeah,
It's funny-
it literally moves you.
Yeah.
Like bodily moves you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is something that
I have no control over.
no,
Yeah.
and that's, I think there are people who enjoy that and people who find that way too personal.
Yeah.
Don't let this movie converse with my gut.
Yeah.
Which is exactly, and with Cronenberg, then that becomes explicit because all of the stories that he deal with are about those kind of like giving over to those forces, right? That's what often the characters in his films have to do as well.
Yeah.
And that's maybe also why it becomes extra uncomfortable, because you can really almost see explicitly how that can play out.
Yeah,
and
or
it
you
deals,
feel it explicitly.
And it deals with the perverted and the macabre and the dangerous and the subversive and the transgressive and the radical. So yeah, you can feel the stakes of also letting go, maybe. And I don't know, this is a total aside, but it reminds me of, I think it was André Bazin, or one of those big film critics who, like, very late in age said, like, the reason that I really like seeing films is also just because I'm a very stunted human being. And I'm not saying, well, maybe I am, but it's like, I think that's also a very interesting way that film is, for us, maybe what the fuck the machines and computers are in the world of Cronenberg for those characters, right? It's kind of all of the same. It's just a conduit also to get, to bring us at a point that reaches beyond our own physical limitations. As I said at the beginning of the cold open, it's literally an extension of ourselves as well. It's a physical manifestation of our desires.
You know what my desire is? To mention one film that we haven't talked about, and there can't be a podcast where I don't terribly impersonate somebody. So Cronenberg made one film called The Dead Zone, starring Christopher Walken. And it isn't really a great film, but it's a very interesting one. And it's about a man who has these incredibly strange visions. It's not very body horror. It's very, maybe the horror of the mind. In the middle of the film, there is a situation where he befriends somebody who is very close to a politician, and that politician will, I won't spoil that film, he will become very important at the end of the film. And that man has a child, and it's a little boy. And that boy wants to go, I believe, skating, or he wants to go to the lake, but the lake is covered in ice. Maybe it's ice hockey or something. I can't fully remember. And Walken has a sort of little friendship with that child. And while Walken is away, he has a vision of the child on the ice playing, and the child falls through the ice and dies. And Walken sort of panics and runs to that house and to the politician's house, and the man is there already, sort of having his child be ready for the play on the ice. And Walken says, "You can't take him there. Something's gonna happen." And just goes like, "What? I'm just a dad having a fun time with my child." And then Walken takes his cane and smashes like a vase standing on a tabletop and screams. And it's just one of my favorite lines that Christopher Walken has ever said. "The ice is gonna break." It's this bizarre. I can't even really explain it. Yeah, I just wanted to mention this because I always, when I think of Cronenberg, I think of those body odor things, but then I also think of the ice. It's gonna break.
Well, this was celebrating cinema.
The ice is gonna break.
Well, I would say after all of this, I think I will take the plunge into Cronenberg and see.
I think it's worth it for everybody. And I think also, like we said, this is, you can think a lot of things about the film, but it raises a lot of questions and things to discuss. And it's also, as we said, quite precious that we still have people making the films like this. So I would definitely, seek it out and find out for yourself where you are on both the enjoyment of the film and the arousal of the flesh. And
and then if I can be maybe an advocate for him on a bit the other side, if you don't enjoy this film, but you do feel there are aspects of it that arouse you in some way or another, seek out his work. Like there might be other things that might be a better entry point
this
for you.
This is definitely not the entry point film because, like you said, Elliot, you need also, like, if you have a couple of films,
a bit of content,
just already checked off a list, then this one will already work maybe a bit better. There's many entry points, it's either the technological paranoia of Videodrome and Existence, or it's kind of like the masculine, macho, transformative aspects of A History of Violence and The Fly, or it's maybe the philosophical ruminations of A Dangerous Method about Freud and Jung.
Or Naked Lunch, which we haven't even discussed.
Naked Lunch, which is a fascinating outlier in his work as well, but at the same time also not. There's just many ways to start watching.
But we can agree that this film will not break the ice.
It will not break the ice if you are not familiar with his work yet. But nonetheless, if you're very adventurous and you just want to see some really nice actors having a pretty good time, then this is still the film for you.
Yes, and it'll be released on the 2nd of June. Otherwise, you can also come to Lab and perhaps start with Dead Ringers, am I right?
Yeah, we're screening Dead Ringers and we're also screening Existence.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Celebrating Cinema. You can expect next time a special episode from Hugo and Tom. They're going to Cannes. What do you guys plan?
Well, at the moment this episode airs, we're already back from Cannes. But at the moment of recording, we are not there yet. Well, Tom, what do you expect? Because it will be your maiden voyage.
Yeah, it will be the first time for me to actually go to Cannes. So I have this very idealized, utopian, romantic image of us walking over the Croisette with a recording in between ourselves and talking about the movies that we've seen there.
We're gonna Ebert and Siskel it up at the Croisette at the beach.
Yeah.
We also have an interview with Roberto Pasolini coming out as well with his latest film, Nowhere Special. Otherwise, you can find all show notes on our website, celebratingcinema.com, or you can always email us at celebratingcinema@lab111.nl. This was a Lab 111 production, produced and edited by myself, Elliot. Music was from Hugo and artwork from Studio FFF. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time.